There's a man in this episode who never says a single word, and he might be the most important new character of the season. Silo has never been a show that rushes its reveals. It plants a detail 2 or 3 episodes before it matters, lets you forget about it, and then quietly cashes it in when you're not looking. Episode 3 does exactly that, with a moment most viewers probably brushed past back in the premiere. Back in the Season 3 premiere, Charles insisted someone was following her. It wasn't clear if that was real or just paranoia catching up with her before a dangerous mission, the kind of thing a stressed-out pilot might imagine in the hours before a flight she's not sure she'll come back from. Episode 3 answers that question definitively, and the answer opens up a much bigger mystery about her brother, Daniel Keene, and the true origins of the Silos themselves. What looked like a small, almost throwaway character beat turns out to be the first thread of a much larger conspiracy, one that eventually loops back around to Daniel's own hands. Daniel follows the first real lead. Daniel doesn't buy the official story that his sister Charles died in a routine accident. He's convinced something's being covered up, and up to this point, that conviction has mostly been grief, looking for somewhere to land, a brother refusing to accept a clean, tragic explanation. Episode 3 finally gives him something concrete to chase. He tracks down the funeral of one of Charles' fellow pilots and speaks with the man's father, Alameda. It's a quiet, understated scene, but it's doing a lot of narrative work. Alameda drops a detail that reframes the entire investigation. There may still be an existing recording of the pilot communications from Charles' final flight. If that recording survived, it could prove whether her death was an accident, a mistake, or something deliberately covered up. And suddenly, Daniel isn't just a grieving brother chasing closure. He's a man one recording away from evidence that could implicate people far more powerful than himself. Before Daniel can push for more, 2 men walk into the room. One is introduced as the captain of the USS Nimitz, a name that instantly signals this conversation just got bigger than a funeral. Standing next to him, out of uniform, is an older man with gray hair. He doesn't get introduced. He doesn't shake anyone's hand. He just spends the entire scene watching Daniel, and the camera makes sure you clock it. We've seen him before. This isn't his first appearance. Rewind to episode 1. Before Charles meets with Daniel, she spots the same gray-haired man on a subway platform. She switches train cars to avoid him, glances back through the window and realizes he's still there. Panicked, she jumps off just before the doors close, while he stays on the train, completely unbothered. At the time, that scene played as ambiguous. Was Charles cracking under pressure, or was she actually being watched? Episode 3 settles it. The same man showing up at a military funeral, standing beside a naval captain, confirms he was tailing her deliberately. Which raises the real question the show wants us sitting with. Why would anyone be watching Charles before her mission? And why is he now watching her brother? We still don't get a name. But the show is dropping hints. He's played by Reed Birney, an actor with a resume, House of Cards, American Horror Story, that networks don't usually spend on a background extra. And his behavior fits that casting choice. He never speaks, never approaches, never interferes. He just observes. That's not how a soldier behaves. That's how someone collecting intelligence behaves. Given that he arrives alongside a naval captain while dressed as a civilian, the likeliest explanations point somewhere above the ordinary chain of command. An intelligence agency, a classified program, or some group operating outside standard military structure entirely. Think less government employee and more the people the government answers to. A uniformed officer takes orders. This man looks like someone who gives them, or at least reports to someone who does. It's also worth asking why he'd bother watching 2 different people from the same family, years apart. Surveillance like that isn't random, and it isn't cheap. Whoever tasked him with tailing Charles before her fatal mission clearly had a reason to think she was a risk. Which means whatever Charles knew, or was about to find out, was dangerous enough to justify having her followed. Now that same attention has shifted to Daniel, which tells us the people watching this family don't consider the threat over just because Charles is gone. The bigger reveal. Daniel built the cage he's investigating. Here's the detail that changes how you should be watching every one of Daniel's scenes. Back in episode 1, Senator Thurman reminds Daniel of his pre-politics career with the Army Corps of Engineers, where he helped invent a drilling system capable of digging enormous structures deep underground while barely disturbing the surface above. On its own, that's just flavor text about his resume. Paired with what we already know about the silos, it's a bombshell. Hundreds of massive underground complexes don't get built in total secrecy by accident. Someone needed technology precise enough to dig that deep without leaving evidence topside. And Thurman is describing exactly that technology, credited to Daniel. It doesn't stop there. Thurman also mentions that Daniel proposed swapping traditional levees for tunnel systems. Longtime viewers will recognize why that detail matters. Season 2 revealed a hidden tunnel network beneath the silos, one so sensitive that even mentioning it risks triggering the safeguard procedure. Connecting Daniel to that tunnel design links him directly to one of the show's most heavily guarded secrets, and it means his fingerprints are on two separate pieces of the silo blueprint, not just one. Put together, Daniel isn't just a congressman chasing his sister's ghost. He may have unknowingly handed the government the exact tools it needed to build the silos in the first place, the drilling method to dig them in secret, and the tunnel network that still connects them decades later. And the show is careful not to frame this as some grand scheme on Daniel's part. He almost certainly believed at the time that he was solving practical infrastructure problems. That's what makes the dramatic irony land so hard. The audience already knows what the silos become, while Daniel is still living in the moment before any of that meaning attaches itself to his work. That reframes an old image, too. Remember the massive drill Juliet found with George Wilkins deep in Silo 18? The one that looked like an abandoned construction relic? Once you know Daniel's background, that machine looks less like set dressing and more like a leftover piece of his original design, sitting there as physical proof, connecting the flashback era to the present day. What the book's already told us. If you've read Hugh Howey's Shift, this will feel familiar. Daniel is the show's version of Daniel Keene, a young congressman recruited by Senator Thurman to help design what he believes is an emergency shelter meant to save people. He has no idea the project is actually built to control the people inside it. Even small architectural choices, like a single central staircase, end up functioning as tools of isolation and control once the world collapses. The show has swapped Donald's architecture background for engineering, but the emotional core survives the adaptation. Daniel isn't a villain. He's a man manipulated by people who understood far more than they let him in on, and that may end up being his real tragedy. He's out here hunting for the truth about his sister, with no idea he may have already built the machine that traps humanity underground. Why this episode matters? None of this gets resolved in episode 3. The gray-haired man stays unnamed, and Daniel is still chasing a recording instead of the full picture. But the episode is quietly stacking connections. Charles, surveillance, Daniel's engineering past, Thurman's fingerprints on both, and a silent observer tying it all together. That's the kind of slow burn setup that rewards patience, and it's exactly why episode 3 feels more important on a second watch than it might have on the first. If the show follows the emotional through line of the books, Daniel's investigation won't end with exposing a cover-up. It'll end with him discovering he helped build the prison humanity is still living in. The gray-haired man isn't a background character. Daniel's past isn't a footnote. And Silo is just getting started, peeling this conspiracy open. Who do you think the gray-haired man is really working for? Drop your theory below and subscribe for the next Silo breakdown.